We go. There you go. I love the voice. Welcome, everybody. It is wonderful to have you here tonight on our, I think, according to Jim, it was our 18th meeting over Zoom. That's quite an impressive record. And I'm delighted to welcome all of you. Happy Flutternutter Day. All right. Thank you, Sally. This is wonderful. I'm going to try things a little bit differently tonight in the way we do the different pieces of the meeting, because one of our members pointed out to me or queried me and said, you know, I have a concern about putting our business meeting out over Zoom, out over YouTube. And that made sense to me. So I'm going to put the business meeting after the main program so that we can cut the recording and have the business meeting. And I hope that that doesn't upset anyone very much, but I think that may make a better flow of the meeting. And you all are welcome to email me tonight and tomorrow and tell me what a bad idea it was. And then we can regroup. But I was very impressed by that. And I apologize for not having thought of that sooner. So without any more ado, I will make Frank our, Frank, what name are you masquerading under?
Beverly.
Beverly?
Yep. My computer just.
Oh, there you are. There you are, Beverly. Would you like me to rename you? Maybe? No. Okay. Well, I will make Beverly a co-host, and we can then move forward. I have to go to the other computer. Excuse me just a second while I get this.
Last thing we want to do.
It's just, let's see, participants. There we are. Beverly.
Jack French is on there.
Yeah.
She said he's sick all week.
All right, Beverly, you are now our co-host. Take it away. Our first 15 is strange as it seems. I asked everyone to mute yourselves, or I'm happy to mute all of you. I just can't unmute you.
All right, let me first ask, can everybody see the my screen?
Have you shared it?
I thought I did. Let me go back and see.
No, let me go. Wait, Frank, I just need to unmute you. Because I just muted everybody because it was easier, except that, okay. No. Hit yes for the ask to unmute. Oh, there you are. But you're still on mute.
Okay, I'm unmuted.
There
now.
you are. Perfect.
Okay,
Perfect.
now.
Thank you, Frank.
Now can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. All right. First, I wanted to do a little bit of clearing up from last month. There was a question about Jack Benny and who substituted for him. And I may have thrown some people off because one of the answers was George Burns. Well, it was George Burns and Gracie Allen who substituted for one program. And the way the question was worded, it was multiple appearances, and that was Orson Welles, who did 3. Then the next question was regarding if Frank Sinatra had ever played baseball. So here's a picture of Frank Sinatra on deck on a team called the Schooners from North Jersey. He was from Hoboken. And here he is out in the field. So yes, Frank Sinatra did play baseball. Then the question was Bing Crosby. Well, Bing Crosby also played baseball. What I didn't know was that at one time he was a part owner of the Detroit Tigers. I did know that he had owned the Pittsburgh Pirates because he and Bob Hope used to joke about it. Bob Hope owned the Cleveland Indians. So this next slide shows Bing Crosby wearing a catcher's mitt. So I guess that was his position. All right, now we're going to get to Strange as It Seems. Strange as It Seems was the creation of John Hicks, and that's him in the picture here. He was born in Huntsville, Alabama in 1907. In 1925, at the age of 18, Hicks began his career with the McClure News Syndicate as an illustrator of editorial cartoons, illustrated history, trivia, and sports events. It was in 1928 that he introduced the feature Strange as It Seems. It quickly became a popular item in McClure publications, appearing daily and on Sunday in over 300 newspapers.
Hello?
Yes.
This is Derek Tague in New Jersey. My friend Joan Leonard called me up, and she's having a lot of problems at the place she's at now, and she's just very frustrated, and she is unable to get into the meeting tonight, and she asked me to convey that to everybody, and she really wants to be here tonight.
Well, hopefully she can get it straightened out.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right, so here's one of the illustrations that was in the McClure papers, Strange as It Seems, this is how he did it. It consisted of illustrations of oddities and seeming impossibilities. They appeared with the notice, "If you doubt this, write for proof to this author." But of course, there was Ripley, and Ripley's Believe It or Not, which actually had existed 9 years before Strange as It Seems. And there were comparisons between Ripley's Believe It or Not and the Hicks Strange as It Seems. And a review in the May 29th, 1929 issue of Time magazine found that Hicks' scholarship and research were, quote, a cut above, close quote, Ripley's, but gave the edge to Ripley's illustrations. And this next slide is one of Ripley's illustrations. And actually, I can remember seeing there were bound volumes of Ripley's Believe It or Not illustrations that you could get at the library or in a bookstore. The surname Hicks was the only identifier that appeared on the Hicks illustrations, and that worked out well because John Hicks died at age 42 in 1944, and his brother Ernest took over the franchise. And 4 years later, in 1948, Ernest died in a plane crash, and his wife Elsie took over. And Elsie Hicks continued the business until 1963, when she turned it over to her son Ernest Jr. and his wife, who ran it until 1970, when it was ended. This is an illustration of a pamphlet that United Airlines would give out to passengers when they were on cross-country flights. Illustrations by John Hicks. And strange as it seems, the next step was to film. Between 1931 and 1934, Universal Studios made 39 10-minute shorts which appeared in movie theaters across the country. As a result of the popularity of the newspaper feature and film series, not surprisingly, on March 22nd of 1935, the Columbia Don Lee Network brought Strange as It Seems to radio for 15-minute programs. Initially, they were on Sunday, Wednesday, and Friday evenings. In late September of 35, the Sunday evening show was dropped. The initial run of the program ended in 1937. Then there were changes in the broadcast evenings, a period of shows that went a half hour long, and then a revival of the quarter-hour shows in the late 1940s. All in all, there were about 600 episodes that aired, and there are I found 63 that are available online. Now, this slide shows an ad that was by X-Lax, who was an early sponsor of the show. And in listening to one show from 1935, it was boasted that in 1934, 46 million packages of X-Lax had been sold. And I looked it up, and that was enough X-Lax for more than 1/3 of the United States population, which at the time was 126,773 people. So that chocolate must have been awfully good. The radio shows were a series of dramatizations of the stories, strange events, people, and places from the Hicks illustrations. Gain Whitman, the original Shandu the Magician, was the first announcer. There was no regular cast on the show, but such radio luminaries as Brett Morrison, Lou Merrill, Alan Hale, and Lionel Barrymore appeared on the program. Now, it did go out on transcription discs, and here's actually from program number 1, a copy of that. And the show that's I'm going to play, though, is from a little later in the series, and it's called Horseflies That Made History. So here's Strange as It Seems, Horseflies That Made History.
The makers of X-Lax present Strange as It Seems. Every man and woman has a story, from the headliners in history to the man in the street, from the latest events in today's newspaper to the dim pages of antiquity. The strangest of the...
Sorry about that.
The makers of X-Lax present Strange as It Seems. Every man and woman has a story, from the headliners in history to the man in the street, from the latest events in today's newspaper to the dim pages of antiquity. The strangest of these are presented to you twice each week by the makers of X-Lax, the original chocolate magazine. But before we start on tonight's strange adventures, may we ask you one question? Have you ever tried X-Lax? We could talk and talk, telling you all of its merits, but it won't mean half as much as your own personal experience. We can tell you X-Lax is milder, gentler, more thoroughly effective. We can tell you that it's a joy to taste, tasting just like delicious chocolate. We can tell you all of its good points, but find out for yourself. We sincerely believe that once you have tried X-Lax, like millions of other people, you'll never be content with anything else. Incidentally, a box costs 10 cents at any drugstore. Get your box today. Horseflies that made history. Did you know that horseflies are responsible for the 4th of July? It is July 4th, 1776, in Independence Hall, Philadelphia. For 3 days, Thomas Jefferson has been arguing with the members of the Continental Congress over his proposed Declaration of Independence. Everything seems to be wrong with it. Divine providence, mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. Well, gentlemen, I've read the whole thing. Mr. Harrison, what do you think of it? Mr. Jefferson, there's but one word in this paper that I approve of, and that is the word Congress. Mr. Jefferson, I think it's unwise to apply the words unfeeling brethren to the people of England. Yes, I do. And I don't like the idea of calling it the United States. It ought to be the United Colonies. Gentlemen. I'd prefer to alter that first phrase when in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve. Mr. Burnett, I think you are making much too much of the whole matter. I beg your pardon, Mr. Rutledge. I trust we have a right to our own opinion. Yes, the opinion carries anyway. What sort? I beg your pardon. Gentlemen, it's not too hot a day. Can't we come to some final agreement? I'm sorry, Mr. Jefferson, to keep you from your cool front porch. Well, I, for one, am going to open that window over there. Come, Mr. Burnett. I can tell you that. Young Jefferson, how do you feel now? Blamed hot, Mr. Franklin. I've made it a rule never to write a paper that's to be reviewed by a public body. I took my lesson years ago from a little story I'm going to tell you. One of Ben Franklin's stories would be comforting right now. A friend of mine made a sign which said, John Thompson, hatter, makes themselves hats for ready money. First, he submitted his sign to all his friends for their suggestions. The first one said to take out Hatter. He took that out. Well, then, first one and another took some words out, till all that was left was John Thompson sells hats. Friends understand? These flies are getting very bothersome. They must have come in when I opened the window. The delivery table around the corner. And these flies are bad. Well, might as well find out what they do. Hey, you gentlemen, it's a disgrace that we have to sit here sweltering in these heat. And if I may say the word, sweating like balls. Not to mention, Mr. Harrison, being bitten to death by horseflies. My proposal suggests, yes, Mr. Hangard, as president of the Continental Congress, I suggest that we omit the reference to the Cook of the English citizenry and let the Bible. But otherwise, accept this Declaration of Independence as it stands. You might as well. That would be a good idea. Yeah, we'll get away from these flies anyway. I, for one, gentlemen, will signify my approval by signing first. You're right on rascal. Why, what do you mean, Mr. Franklin? I didn't know you for a law-abiding young citizen. I'd say you'd open that window and let in those horseflies on purpose, huh? Strange as it seems, an open window without a screen, a livery stable around the corner, some hot July weather, and a few large horseflies were largely the reason why we celebrate the signing of the Declaration of Independence on the 4th of July. The amazing parallel. 1769, a momentous year. Two great men are born in that year who are destined one day to face each other in battle. One born in Corsica is christened Napoleon Bonaparte. The other is born in Ireland. His name is Arthur Wellesley. When they are old enough, the two boys are sent to military schools in France. One to Paris, the other to Angers. Young Bonaparte goes to the École Militaire in Paris. One day, he sits under a tree working out a complicated problem in military tactics. Another boy, Leopold Dupart, throws himself down on the grass beside the young Napoleon.
Why don't you come with us, Napoleon? It is a holiday. We are going to the bois. I have no time for play. But what are you doing? Let me look. It is just a problem. What kind of a problem? I'm working out an imaginary battle. Battle? Don't you get enough of that during school hours? No, I never get enough of that. No, eh bien. Well, I, for one, am going to the bois with the other. They say the queen sometimes goes there. Once I danced with her once. Marie Antoinette will not dance much longer. Napoleon, that is treason. I am thankful I do not have to rule France. It is too much work. I will not mind the work. You will not mind. Oh, it is nothing. Run along, Leon, like a good fellow. You will not join us. Oh, there is such a moon tonight. Yeah. No, I'm all right. Goodbye, Leo. Enjoy yourself.
That night in the bois, the moon cast a fairy-like radiance over the wooded slopes and a little bend lit my lantern. Leopold, alone for the moment, noticed a young man in cadet uniform standing apart from the others. He takes pity on him.
You look lonely. Oh, no. You see, this is my first evening in Paris. You are English. I see that. You are in military school here? Yes, at Angers. Yes. Let me introduce myself. I am Leopold Dupart. I am Arthur Wellesley, the other. I was just going to a little cabaret. Will you join me? I should like to very much, but I have a lot of reading to do. Reading? Oh, mon Dieu. You are as bad as Napoleon Bonaparte. He is the shining light of our school, but pardieu, how he works. Perhaps he prefers to work. For instance, I prefer to read about India than to dance the polka. Read about India? Someday I plan to go there with the English army. You actually know what you want to do? Oh, you and Napoleon must have been born under the same star. Perhaps I will meet this Napoleon someday. Who knows? We might even become friends.
Many years pass. Napoleon has realized his destiny. He has become Emperor of France, has involved all Europe in war. And fate steps in and he's defeated. Broken in power, but not in spirit, he is sent to Elba, a prisoner. But a few months later, he escapes, returns to France. War again. Then follows the Battle of Waterloo. June 18th, 1815. Napoleon is hopelessly outnumbered by the Allied forces under the command of Wellington, the Iron Duke.
Forward the flames! Forward! For God is St. George!
Who is the Duke of Wellington? Why, he is the boy named Arthur Wellesley, whom you met on the Paris moonlit night many years ago. Remember, he said then that he would rather read about India than dance polka. He also realized his ambition. He has gone to India, made an immortal name for himself, received the title of Duke of Wellington. Now, after 30 years, he faces the greatest general in the world on the field of battle. One of them will be the victor. Which one? It is 9 in the evening. Napoleon has begun to retreat. At an inn near the battlefield, Wellington compares with the Prussian general Absher.
Very good. We have him now. Yes, Napoleon is ours. So many times he told me. And we would not be talking like this if Napoleon were the man you. Perhaps. But he told us would rather die for Napoleon than live for anyone. You know, it's all. But I just remembered an incident of many years ago. Oh? It was in Paris. Some French cadets asked me to go to a cabaret. I remember that they mentioned a Napoleon, a boy who was a great student. I've often wondered, could it have been this Napoleon? I wonder. Well, this is no time for such talk. Leave them. The Russians follow the retreat of the French. Don't let them rest a moment, Blucher. Make Napoleon cross the River Somme. This time we must finish him forever.
Strange as it seems, coincidence played an amazing part in the careers of Napoleon and the Duke of Wellington. Both were born on an island in the same year. Each lost his father at the age of 16. Each had 4 brothers and 3 sisters. Each went to a French military school at the same time. Each became a great military leader. But at Waterloo, Wellington became the victor. Napoleon, the vanquished. Not all wars are fought on battlefields. Some of the greatest are fought by scientists in quiet laboratories with test tubes. Perhaps one of the bitterest, most baffling, has been against cold. Just common, everyday cold. And while science isn't ready to tell us just what causes cold, it has laid down some simple but important rules for their prevention. Get enough sleep. Eat wisely. Dress warmly. Keep out of dress. Keep your feet dry. And keep regular. Sounds simple, doesn't it? But in keeping regular, remember that you must choose the right laxative for you. It must be mild, gentle, and yet thoroughly effective. And X-Lax is as mild and gentle and yet as thoroughly effective as any laxative. And this is important too. It is a delight to take. It tastes just like smooth, velvety chocolate. X-Lax is the ideal laxative for every member of your family. Next time, you will hear of the world's strangest text and an old-fashioned cure for rabies. You will also travel to the strange mausoleum of knowledge. You have just heard Strange as It Seems by John Hicks with original music composed and conducted by Billy Mills. Yale was founded by
So that's strange as it seems. Each episode contained 2 stories. And as you saw at the end of the program, they gave you a promo of what the next show would be. Of the shows that are available online, most of them are of decent quality to listen to, and some of them are more interesting than others. But strange as it seems, it worked out well for a number of years, and that's the program, first 15 for tonight.
Thank you very much, Frank. That was fun for me. Does anyone have any questions or observations? Edgar has his hand up.
I have a question. I saw the label, the Monarch label, which I guess is now an MP3, but I see that it was put out by Paul Harvey Radio. Are they acquiring old radio shows, or do they have some financial interest in Strange as It Seems?
Edgar, I don't know the answer to that. I noticed it on the label, but candidly, I didn't research it to find out.
Oh, that's okay. I just was curious. I noticed it. I didn't think he did it back then. He must have been a kid, but now I guess his company or his estate's doing stuff. But thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Other questions or curiosities? All right. Well,
Well, I was going to ask, what was the approximate date of that program? I didn't hear the date.
That was from, I don't have the exact date, but it was 1935.
Thank you.
I will mention too that I do have some of the Ripley, believe it or not, they also had a radio program, and I do have a few of those in a collection as well. But I thought these were well done.
well, I certainly enjoyed them. So thank you so much again, Frank. That was just wonderful, and coming up with these things for the club and the quizzes and everything. I really appreciate how hard you work to keep us all entertained. So thank you for that.
My pleasure.
Now let's see. Now we go, if Sally Stevens is ready, to the first part of the quiz, the questions. So let me give Sally the ability to launch the poll. And of course, we look forward to her inimitable delivery of Jack's quiz this month, The Long Arm of the Law. Oh, Donna has her hand up. Did you have a question, Donna? Can you unmute? Let's see. Donna. Or maybe not. All right. So, Sally, are you with us?
I'm here.
Yay. Very good. Well, take it away, Sal.
All right. So I've had a lot of practice this week in using my neutral voice because we've been doing a lot of testing at school. So I am ready. It actually almost made me laugh while I was doing some of this testing. We have to use a neutral voice. And I was like, oh no, don't slip into the radio neutral, because then it'll get real weird. But I managed to keep it together, All right, so this is your opportunity, children, to get your pencils and your paper, or to have your clicker finger ready, because we are about to take our October quiz. I hope you've all been studying for your quiz about the long arm of the law. It's not a short arm, it's a long arm. Long arm. This is me stalling for you to get your materials. I see several of you had your pencils ready And I think, oh, excellent. Wendy has her pen. Very good, Wendy. Oh, John has his pen. Very nice. We are ready to go. I'm going to launch the poll. As I say every month, you are welcome to click ahead on the poll on the screen. However, you will move faster than I will read. I will read every question and answer choices one time. If you need me to reread it, I will read it at the end.
Professor,
Oh.
will this be on the final exam?
I'm sorry, Edgar, did you raise your hand?
Oh, you got me.
Please always raise your hand when you're, oh, thank you, Edgar, for making a better choice. Yes, Edgar, what was your question?
You're good. Yes, no. Will this material be on the final exam, Professor?
Yes, at whatever date that will be. Yes, this is a cumulative exam. Everything we've done up to this point will be on the final exam. All
my
18
Lord.
months worth.
Thank you.
So be
Thank
ready.
you, Professor.
Excellent. You're welcome. Good question. Are we ready to move on? Launching poll. Thumbs up that you can see the poll. Thank you. Number 1. On his mutual show, Tom Mix was a U.S. Marshal. His constant companion, Mike Shaw, was also in law enforcement. As what? A. San Antonio Police Sergeant. B. Border Patrol Agent. C. Local Sheriff. D. Texas Ranger. Number 2. On the Shadow long-term series, who represented the law enforcement authority? A. Lieutenant Southwest. B. Commissioner Easton. C. Captain Northeast. D. Commissioner Weston. Number 3. Perry Mason, a quasi-soap opera on radio, usually included which police officer? A. Captain Blech. Bligh Jack. Spelled B-L-I-G-H. Bligh? I teach phonics. B. Lieutenant Tragg. C. Sergeant Bilko. I love that movie. I love that movie so much. D. Chief Roma. Number 4. Craig McDonald portrayed 2 different characters on Bobby Benson, Harka and Irish. He was also the lead in which crime show? A. Crime Does Not Pay. B. Highway Patrol. C. Official Detective. D. Call the Police. Number 5. 20 Mule Team Borax sponsored Death Valley Sheriff for years. Name the leading character role. A. Mark Chase. B. Mark Anderson. C. Mark Trail. D. Mark my words. Number 6. Phillips H. Lord produced Policewoman, partially based on the career of NYPD officer Mary Sullivan. So who played Mary on this series? A. Jan Miner. B. Leslie Woods. C. Joan Alexander. D. Betty Gard. Number 7. The FBI in Peace and War was on CBS for 14 years. Who were the 2 leading agents on the show? A. Lewis and Martin. B. Harty and Laurel. C. Shepard and Andrews. D. Allen and Burns. Jack is frying my circuits. Number 8. Boston Blackie aired for 6 years on NBC. He often consulted with which law officer? A. Commissioner Earlyday. B. Inspector Faraday. C. Police Chief Maladay. D. Detective Whataday. Number 9. An early crime show, Calling All Cars, ran from 1933 to 1939. Name the leading character. A. Captain Millard Fillmore, Chicago Police. B. Lieutenant Frank Morgan, Robbery Squad, NYPD. C. Dr. John H. Watson, California Forensic Lab. D. Sergeant Jesse Rosenquist, Los Angeles PD. Number 10. the incomparable Charlie Chan was in the employ of A. San Francisco Police Department, B. Honolulu Police Department, C. California State Police, D. New York City Police. At this time, I will accept raised hands if you need a question reread. If you just want to try and make me break character, you may not raise your hand or risk being sent to detention. I see you, John Abbott. Toughest one yet, Jack.
Miss Stevens, Wendy is kicking me.
Wendy, keep all body parts to yourself. You're fine. We will review the answers following the main program. I see several of you have participated in the virtual poll. I will allow that to run in the background. I'm going to close my window, but that will continue to run. If you wish to enter your answers on there, it is not required, but you may. Otherwise, keep your papers and pencils handy, children, because after the program, we will go over the answers and no peeking at each other's papers.
Thank you very much, Ms. Stevens, for keeping it all together. And thank you, Jack, for wonderful questions. We will see what the answers are. So now we are at the main part of our program, and I will fix it so that our presenter, Frank Absher, can, let me just see where we are here. I'm going to give him co-host privileges. So if he has screens to share or what have you, you've got the keys to the kingdom, Frank. Thank you for offering to bring us our main program today, and I will turn everything over to you.
Well, I hate to disappoint Wendy. I'm an old radio guy, so I don't have any visuals.
Oh, wonderful. Perfect.
I'll simply ask that you folks use the theater of the mind routine, and probably could add a lot to the presentation tonight. I do appreciate the fact that in looking at the screens, there is a significant representation of gray and white hair, which means that we have an appreciation for what is old and what is past. And unfortunately, we're in the minority nowadays because a lot of people don't think that's terribly important. I found that in my efforts to gather material that's current, even trying to convince them that what they do today is history tomorrow, it's why would you want this? You know, and so I can't get through to them in that way. We really, if you stop and think about our past and when we had to do term papers and do various forms of research and had to go to an actual archive or a library, we probably find ourselves doing research, checking newspapers or microfilm or magazines. And there is a tendency when we do this to get distracted by other things we see in those publications, the advertisements, maybe an article we hadn't planned on reading, but sounds too good to really pass up. So we have to check it out too. We'll stop what we're doing long enough to at least check and see what that other thing is all about. And it's really a human nature that we're experiencing there. In online research, we're less likely to encounter that because we can type in the search words and go right to where we want to go, and that's it. And that, unfortunately, is the sort of research that is most common today. I remember going to a seminar at Oxford in the UK and hearing some exchange students from Kentucky belly aching over a few flagons of beer that the professor in their particular course they were attending had forbidden them from using any online research. They had to go to the library and perish the thought. You know, it's just a terrible experience, but nonetheless, I liked what that professor was doing. But to get back to what we're experiencing today, I think our archives are in a gray area when we're talking about online archives and institutions. Everybody knows they have to have some presence online, but they don't know to what extent they can go. We're seeing much more nowadays with materials being offered up and their usually expired copyright. But there's a lot of fear, especially with audio archives, of lawsuits or charges of copyright infringement, as well as phone calls from ASCAP, BMI, CSAC, demanding money from these people who are posting it because they're airing licensed works. You know, and many of these online archives that are out there nowadays are created and operated by individuals rather than by institutions. And that carries with it a fairly high vulnerability factor. None of these people wants to go out and hire a lawyer to defend what they're doing. It's one of the reasons that the growth of the online audio archives has been awfully slow. Here in St. Louis, where I'm based, we're building an online archive. In fact, we're building an archive in itself. We started from scratch about 10 years ago. And we have a media archive, which is all forms of media, advertising, and public relations, and it's all local materials. But those of us who have public archives, especially the ones that have broadcast air checks, are finding that there's a lot of interest in what they collected, coming not from broadcasters, but from sociologists. These people, these sociologists see, or in the case of audio archives, hear stuff in our materials that we weren't really aware of or we didn't pick up on. These folks know that the radio broadcasts and the ads in the radio broadcasts provide a real window to what life was like in the past, depicting society's everyday values, the thoughts, the fears, even what constitutes their sense of humor. This makes the stuff that we're saving now even more important to future generations because a huge amount of our cultural history has been broadcast on the radio. I recently spoke to a group of current radio broadcasters and I told them of an archive that I had started that has an air check in it about a local, it was a local record hop. It was on a radio station in a small town. And it occurred to me after I sat down, this audience is current radio broadcasters. And half of the folks in that audience were so young that they probably had no idea what a record hop was. And had probably never even held an actual record. Now, you folks have been instrumental in preserving a significant phase of the development of electronic media, let's face it. You've invested your own money, your time, your energy. Like me, you've probably wondered what's going to happen to everything you've accumulated over those years. I want to talk about that for a minute. I have an acquaintance, a guy I met online. We shared similar interests. And I finally said, hey, let's get together, talk. I drove out to his office. And he has amassed a huge collection of antique radios and television sets. It literally took my breath away the first time I saw those. It's unbelievable. He keeps the existence of this collection a secret. Other collectors know that he buys things, but they're not aware of this unobtrusive warehouse that he has. There are only about 6 of us who really know this thing even exists. It contains literally several $1 million worth of these beautiful antiques, radios, and televisions. I talked with him fairly recently, sat down, and we talked about his plans for the collection. The guy is a bit older than I am. He and his accountant had decided they were going to give all of these radios and TVs away to the local county historical society. Made sense. They didn't want them because of the expense that they would incur just to house the collection. Then there's insurance, preservation, and staffing a building. The list goes on. So they declined his donation, the massive donation of radios and televisions. He hemmed and hawed around about it and finally came up with the idea that he would sell them piecemeal on eBay. That alone would take several years and a lot of work. So these antiques, these beautiful antiques, continue to sit in the warehouse, appreciated by 6 of us. I bring this up not to encourage you to do anything, but to provide you with the sort of mindset that exists behind the Radio Preservation Task Force. This group was founded in 2014. It's been tasked by the Library of Congress through the National Radio or National Recording Preservation Board to go out all over the country, find collections of audio radio recordings. They're supposed to make a list of these. The list is not limited to institutions. It's a situation where this group, myself included, has been reaching out to private collectors as well. The task force doesn't plan to tell the owners of these recordings what to do with them. It would be kind of stupid. Instead, they're trying to recognize what has already been accomplished in all these individual preservation efforts. I'm working with them and with people like you to make sure we don't lose what you've already worked hard to preserve. We are not, nor do we claim to be, the Library of Congress. The goal of the Radio Preservation Task Force is to assemble a massive database that lists all the radio recording or air check collections. Not saying that you have any particular program, but we want people to know where these collections are. Now, we understand that there are some problems with this. They work with institutions and with folks who oversee the collections to help them stay up to date on things like preservation practices, digitization solutions, and so forth. But because of this effort, even smaller collections can be preserved in the best possible manner, not to give to the Library of Congress, but to preserve. As you might guess, this is a pretty slow process. It's constantly evolving. It's being fine-tuned along the way, tweaked here and there, because there are unanticipated circumstances that come up. As it exists right now, though, the database includes listings of institutions as well as private collectors. Some listings have links to online inventories of collections. Others have a brief description of the contents, but no individual listings. There are people like my radio collector friend who would rather not reveal the details of what they've gathered. This is understood, it's appreciated, it is respected. These people are allowed to give their collection a sort of a title, like old-time radio shows, and a brief description, but they withhold their identities and simply say, Tallahassee collection, or whatever might be the case that comes to mind. But they can withhold their identities, their specific inventories, as well as their contact information. But working with the RPTF can also serve some purposes that you might not come to conclude fairly quickly. Let's say that you initially have a generic anonymous listing in our database. You can let our people know that you'd be willing to speak with anyone who shows an interest in what you've got. They would base its interest, of course, on whatever listing you had given the RPTF. Our people could act as a sort of a go-between to establish whatever communication you would find most comfortable. You're under no obligation whatsoever. You wouldn't have to call people back. You wouldn't have to take any contacts at all. If at some point you decided it's time to liquidate this collection, our people have been able to provide some limited support to people who have audio collections. So they might be able to help you out as well. Finding the institution that might have an interest in acquiring all or part of your collection. But we also know that institutions nowadays, they're not willing to take on acquisitions of big collections. And we know that the OTR community can be very helpful in this regard. That said, that the RPTF database reaches far beyond the OTR community. So you could certainly let people in your realm know what's going on. But our database hits institutions, it hits other private collectors. And so there's a possibility that if you were going to liquidate, you could hit a different group of people by letting it be known through the RPTF. Institutions outside of your OTR collectors would be aware. You would need to keep in mind, though, that our network is mostly nonprofit institutions. So we couldn't really depend on to give you leads for people who have a lot of money who would be willing to buy your collection, at least not through the RPTF. Now, does the RPTF have its eyes on your collection in terms of being a representative of the Library of Congress? Absolutely not. No, the Library of Congress is really this institution that has authorized our existence, our function, if you will, but we're not out to gain anything by this. A service like the RPTF database would like to be a clearinghouse of sorts. It will help researchers and institutions find out what exists and what doesn't exist. And our existing database will show more than just audio recordings. If you were to go to it, you would find that there are listings of not only air checks, as we call them, but also scripts, photos, promotional materials. These peripherals are also pretty valuable if you stop and think about it. I know every one of you has had access to some as well, not only to researchers, but also to writers. As the overseer of a local media archive here in St. Louis, I've helped a lot of reporters, authors, TV producers find specific visuals and information that they're seeking. We often are given boxes full of stuff in our archive from the family of someone who had been in radio or television or print media. Here, we don't want this anymore, take it. These boxes will contain all sorts of ephemera, as well as radio station memos, bumper stickers, newspaper clippings, what have you. So imagine for a moment in a near perfect world for researchers. It would be one in which you could go to the RPTF database to see what radio recordings and support materials might be out there, much like you can do today with print materials in the WorldCat that's posted online. It's still in the distant future, but like anything that is truly worthwhile, it has to start somewhere, and that's what we're doing. We are at that starting point with the Radio Preservation Task Force, and they would truly benefit from any support members of the OTR community could give us. Does anybody have any questions, any comments, any arguments? I will post my email address on the chat here so that anybody who wishes to may get in touch with me afterwards. I didn't come here to sell you. I didn't come here to take your tapes. I simply wanted you to know what we're trying to do. And if you're interested, we can help you do that.
Thank you very much, Frank. That was wonderful. And I'm confident that some people will have some questions for you. I think it's a great endeavor.
I have a question.
Who?
Wendy, I have a question.
Yes.
Frank, I really appreciated your presentation, and you might have given me an idea of where to start. I have a very huge collection of old time radio, and I was very fortunate into having met and become very close to David Siegel, who was a collector. Actually, he was an archivist rather than a collector. And he hated MP3s. And he used to send me the MP3s, which I'm sure a lot of them came off of tapes, the old reel-to-reel tapes. And I would take these programs and put them on regular CDs for him, but I got to hold the tapes, and there were shows on there that I had never heard of before. And I know I have some things here that are, I'm sure if I have them, somebody else has them, but a lot of them are extremely rare, I would say. And I'm waiting to see your email address, so I'm going to get in touch with you. Can't hear you.
Frank, you're on mute.
There we go. It's interesting that you mentioned MP3s because when we began this project, the dyed-in-the-wool archivists around the United States just cringed at the thought of not getting materials that were not original. They want the original stuff. They don't want copies. Well, tell me this, how do you get an original radio broadcast? Once it's over, the only thing you have left is a copy of it. And so slowly, very slowly, all of these people who would not accept the fact that you were getting copies have sort of come around, especially with all of the digitization that's taking place. And as we all know, with the oxide on the tapes deteriorating rapidly, even those copies are going. But the preservation is the key here. And so I'll look forward to hearing from you, Charles. And George D says he's got a question too. Or thoughts? Nope,
I'll ask him to unmute.
Okay.
And see if we have any success with that. And I'll ask him to start his video as well. Sometimes this works, and sometimes it doesn't. It's the.
While we're waiting on that, I will tell you that I'm an old broadcaster from way back, and
sorry about that. Whenever you're finished, I'm
okay. I left the business and got into teaching at the university level, and I can say now that I'm no longer doing either one of those things. But working with academics is almost like being thrown into a pit of snakes. It boggles the mind how slowly they operate and how many committees they have to form and how sometimes out of touch with reality they are. That said, they move slowly, and that gives us a chance to make sure we're doing it the right way. Okay, George, I'm sorry. You got to unmute.
Unmute. I'm unmuted now.
There we go.
Awesome. Now I get to talk to you. Sorry about that. With all these windows on the phone, and it's easy. I lost where I was. So, but anyway, even though I'm technologically competent in some ways, I still mess things up. Okay, I got a lot of thoughts on this matter, and the reason why is what you're talking about is a very sincere and important area deep to my heart, because it's so important for us to, all of us, to turn the thing over to the next generation. And a lot of the next generation, while there's many that do care about this stuff, and there's a core group, I'm from the collectible world, and I don't have a really vintage old-time radio collection per se, but because I wasn't collecting tapes in the 70s and stuff, in the 60s, and transcription discs like many have. But I did collect the videotapes starting around 1979, and I recorded a lot of stuff that may be one of a kind today, whether it's simply because it's a copy with original commercials, or because it was something done locally that hasn't been aired, or something I got from somebody film chained it years ago and may not be in the public circulation. And one thing I've noticed is many of the things that we hold dear, like 50s cowboys and, and Buck Rogers, it's not keeping, even with collectibles, it's just not keeping the value in a generation that's more concerned with He-Man and Masters of the Universe and My Little Pony. But that being said, I still have my video collection. I was attempting to try to find somebody to handle it in the sense of transferring. And if I was a young kid and somebody said to me today, you can have a copy of my collection if you just digitalize it for me, I would have said, yeah, I'd be there 24/7. But to match that up is, it's becoming more of a challenge. It's not as easy as it was years ago with a generation that may not be looking at the past as much as we have. The concern on my mind is twofold. One is the way you're addressing it from an archive point of view, but you also pointed out the serious concern that once things go into the dark pool of the archive, it doesn't get out too easily. There are organizations doing old-time radio that are transcribing things, circulating it, getting it out. And I'm thinking a two-prong approach, because nothing is, with my videotape collection, it would be nice to donate it to the Smithsonian, but I know no one would, not that the Smithsonian would want it, but I know no one would ever see it. But if I got it out somehow, then, and it wouldn't even be, it would be helping people, if you know what I'm trying to say, and helping the community. And the more copies of anything that exists, the more likely its preservation will be. Many things, like we could think about London After Midnight as an example, where one copy was in a warehouse and now we have no copies. So there are organizations that are copying old-time radio. They're getting it out in MP3 format, and maybe there's organizations that be willing to do it in higher quality. But I think while official channels like libraries may not have that ability, just like in the past, the radio collecting community has been able to do a lot more in that area.
George, let me interrupt you for just a minute to address something that you're moving toward here.
Okay,
and that is that when we are saying preservation, we don't know who we're preserving for. We don't know who's going to want this 20 years from now. There was a man in St. Louis who had been a children's television show host in the 50s. I started researching him and found his radio work from the 40s. And so I poked around and ended up finding some air checks of his work some of which was done on a program that originated in St. Louis called The Mary Lee Taylor Show, which was a combination soap opera and recipes. And I found a recording of the program with him in it.
Awesome.
And I got the tape and I digitized it and I got a CD and I gave it to him. He didn't have a CD player. Okay, so there's one problem. But when he died, he gave it to his son who lived in a nearby suburb. His son called me and he said, "We never knew Dad had been on network radio. He never talked about it. And now we have a show of my father on the CBS radio network." So when we preserve, we don't know who we're doing it for. We're simply doing it for a generation of people we'll never meet, never see, but someone will say, "Oh my gosh, I know who that person is. That's my grandfather." Okay, I'm sorry, George. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Well, you were right. That's okay. You were fortunate to be able to get that out. There are other instances where things can't get out. For example, our good friend Rosemary Rice, who's been at many conventions, she donated her, from what I heard through the grapevine, she donated her entire collection to the Museum of Broadcasting. And where it ended up, no one knows. Now they do have many of the TV shows, but again, it's not accessible unless you want to sit in one of the cubicles. So that's why my thoughts is, you look at Dave Siegel's collection as an example. Wonderful man. What his intentions originally were may have been followed through. I don't know. But once things go sold into, from what somebody said previously, it went into a collection which most people are not going to get much access to. So that's why I say, as part of your preservation, and I'm not saying not to pursue this line, but I'm also saying it might, if you look into multitasking it, whereas you put things, from what you're describing, you're simply just inventorying at this point. You're not really having it donated, but which is a good thing, but at the same that it's being inventoried. But at the same point, there are many groups out there who will get it out, and it doesn't mean you can't donate it to these private institutions at the same time. It's a two-prong approach where we're covering all the bases, where people aren't going to be saying, I really want to see such and such a show or hear such and such a show, but it's locked in an archive. And having it in that archive, of course, is good, but having it only in that archive creates also an additional level of risk.
But what we're doing here is we are letting people know that that show exists and that it is in this archive. If the archive is chosen to get that detailed in their listing, that's the first step. I can't say what the next steps are going to be. We're not going to be Big Brother and come to all of you and say, your collections need to be digitized, give them to us and we'll do it. No. You have put all of your money, your time, your effort into this. You do not need anybody telling you what to do with your collections. We're simply saying, let's let people know what does exist. And that's all.
There's nothing wrong with that. But I just hope that information is available where people who are open to getting things in circulation, the owners of the material are aware of the situation and have that right to, and it's not just from an institutional perspective.
Right. Okay.
This reminds me of a conversation I had last weekend, actually, with a man who had been a teacher of mine in 7th grade in France. And he also did a series of radio interviews in the 70s with American writers. He was in New York City. His name is Charles Ruas. And he interviewed people like Tennessee Williams, Anais Nin, I mean, a whole slew of people. And there was a book that was also generated called Conversations with American Writers. And he lives in New York City. And he was talking to my husband and me about the importance of really looking at, you know, where collections that we've amassed are going to do what the next step is. And so I think it is an important question. And I think it's wonderful the work that's being done to just pull this information, you know, be a kind of not a clearinghouse, but just a resource for people to know this is here, that's there. And, you know, what you do with that afterwards, you know, you have options. Certainly in New York, you have so many different organizations, museums, universities, et cetera, and online ways of archiving things. And I think it's an important question, and I'm really glad that that there are people who are actively working on this.
Well, you know, Wendy, just a couple of other thoughts here. It's not just the radio program, though. For example, we have a Tom Mix radio program in our collection. The reason we have it is because it was sponsored by Ralston Purina, which is headquartered here in St. Louis. We have since expanded our collection to include advertising. So we have the radio ads from Tom Mix and the Ralston, the cereals and so forth. But it's fascinating to listen to the ads for Ralston Purina that ran during World War II. Anybody who's doing any kind of research on the war only needs to look at what advertising did during the war. And you can see it in the print ads, you can hear it in the radio ads. You say, my gosh, listen to this. Only 2 ration points or whatever the case might be. So again, we do not know who's going to want the archives we're collecting. I got a call from a lady. She said, I understand you have an archive of radio history. And I said, yes, it's media history. And she said, well, I need a favor. Do you have a photograph of so-and-so who was a disc jockey? I said, yes, ma'am, we do. And she said, I really need your help. I'm his daughter, and he died in a trailer fire last week, and everything he had was lost. Can you send me a copy of the picture so we can use it in the funeral?
Oh.
Again, who would ever in a million years think of this as a reason to have an archive? But we had it. So all I'm saying to you folks, no, we don't want your collection. But what we want to do is make people aware that you are a collector. So if they need to find something, they might be able to check with you.
Frank, John Abbott here.
Yeah.
I was very intrigued by your initial comments about sociologists, you know, being extraordinarily interested. And that's one of the things that, you know, whenever I listen to a program, you know, I'm old enough to remember some of the things that happened in the 50s. And it, you know, it does provide a very deep insight into the mindset of the public, not only into things that happened, but how people felt about it. And you know, the kids today, you know, anything that's more than 5 minutes old is, you know, irrelevant to them. But there's a lot of value, and unfortunately, a lot of this stuff is stuck away because of the fear of copyright suits, which I don't know. I don't know whether CBS has ever sued anybody for, you know, broadcasting CBS radio programs, but you know, there's that fear that keeps this stuff from coming forth.
Of course, but I'm not worried about that, because the first thing we have to do, the first thing, which is what you folks are doing, we have to preserve it. Once we've preserved it, we have to let people know it exists. After that, we can do whatever we want, but preserving is first, and then cataloging and letting people know is second. No other takers?
Good heavens. Ron and Margie, did you have a question?
I had a comment. This has been fascinating, and thank you for this presentation. And just a comment in passing, but it seems to me the importance of these collections that you're talking about, they represent a good part of the history of our cultural evolution and could be even more important as the years go by. So I think it's very important that the restoration and preservation of this material be maintained, and I respect and applaud those who are involved enough to take an interest in it. So I thank you for that very much.
Thank you.
We still need the email address.
I just put it up in the chat.
Oh, I didn't see it.
Yep.
It's just if you go into chat now, you'll see it.
Oh, okay. I've never done that.
Oh, if you don't, there's an area that says more, or there are 3 dots, or
Wendy,
or chat.
Wendy,
you can.
I'll send you my email to Wendy, and you can just send it out to everybody.
All right.
At the same time, I can send you the URL of the database that we've started, so if people want to look at it, they can.
Wonderful. Thank you, Frank.
Okay.
I got a question for you, if it's okay.
Yes.
I think I'm not sure if I misunderstood you or not, so I want to make sure. I thought originally your goal was to catalog and have an inventory. At the end of the presentation, you clarified the goal is preserve and then catalog. So the question is what, and assuming that is your goal, I don't know which one of the two, but if your goal is to preserve first, what is your strategy to preserve it?
Can you help me with this? I didn't understand it, Wendy. Did you understand?
As I so it's a difference between, George, correct me if I'm wrong, preserving and cataloging.
Right. Oh, okay, got it.
He said originally that his main goal was to have a catalog so everybody will know where everything is. Towards the end of the presentation, I think he said our goal is first to preserve and then after catalog. So did I misunderstand one of the two ways? And if his first primary goal is to preserve, what is his strategy to preserve?
Oh, okay. Here we go. George, I'll try to clarify. Our goal at the Radio Preservation Task Force is not to preserve. We're working with people who are preserving things to let them know that we have this database for people who are looking for stuff. So there is a thing in the libraries right now, an online called WorldCat. It stands for World Catalog. What that amounts to is it lists institutions all over the world and the publications those institutions have. I needed to find a newspaper that was published in St. Louis in 1895. I searched WorldCat. I found one library in England that had one issue of the newspaper, and I was able to get that. That's essentially what we're doing here. But if some people don't want to list everything they have in their collection, we have to understand that, we respect that, and you can simply say that you're an old-time radio collector and you have hundreds of programs, and we'll be the go-between. Somebody calls and says, well, what about that George D? Can I get in touch with him and find out what he's got? We will then contact you and say, George, are you interested in talking to somebody about what you have in your collection? If you say no, that ends it. If you say, yeah, I'll talk to him. So then we can be the go-between and get out of the middle. So we're not going to ask you to catalog your things, but I'm doing it for our collection so that people can go on and say, oh, look, they've got The Land We Live In from 1948 that was broadcast in St. Louis. Bang.
Now, question for you. Are you also willing to be the go-between to work and help organizations, both profit and not-for-profit? Profit organizations might be people like Marty Grams or Fred Burney, who help people that way. nonprofits might be things like the Old Time Radio Researchers Group.
George, I'm having a little trouble understanding your. We're willing to be a go-between between for-profit and not-for-profit.
Right. So in other words, Bernie and grants do some things that help get things out. Are you willing to work with organizations such as that? Are you willing to work with groups like Old Time Radio Researchers Group? I'm not speaking for them. I'm just asking, if they needed things, would you help them get it also?
No, we don't help them get it. What we do is we'll list any archive collections that are submitted to us, but that's all we'll do. And then if you need a go-between and you want to stay anonymous or whatever, we will do that. But we will not be marketing anybody. We won't be representing anybody.
Okay, thank you.
That would be an absolutely massive job if you were to take that on. And what I appreciate is you keep it very clear what you're doing. And I like the fact, especially in this day of, scams and internet weirdity that goes on, that you're willing to say, okay, I've got this guy. Do you want to talk to him or not? And if you say no, it's like, okay, great. And then it stops there.
Yes.
So it protects, and the reality is that none of us is getting any younger, and the computer hackers are getting more and more sophisticated. So it is nice to have that level of extra protection. In my opinion, this is just my personal.
List a website that has your collection on it so that people can see it, that's fine. You can do that in the database. If you didn't want it, it won't be there.
Can I inject something here?
No.
Wendy just mentioned something about we're all getting older. Yes, excuse me. Yes, we are. Now, I was introduced to this group. I didn't even know it existed. I was introduced by Frank Morgan, and I thank him very, very much for calling my attention to this. And I have to admit that a lot of what I've listened to over the past couple months are programs that I had no idea existed. And some of them, of course, were popular before I was born in 1944. But in my own way, I understand the importance of recognizing what people have. And as they get older, the younger generation may not have any knowledge or interest in saving this. One thing comes to mind. A number of years ago, I was entertaining folks at a retirement assisted living facility. And the programs that I do every month are based upon people in the world of music who were born in that particular month. And this was the month of December. And there was a fellow who was born in New York Christmas Eve, an Italian fellow by the name of Salvatore Guaragna. Probably none of you know the name Salvatore Guaragna, but you might know his professional name, Harry Warren, who did music for 42nd Street and so many other things. But anyhow, I was talking with two sisters who lived at this facility, and I had mentioned the name. I thought I'm going to impress the daylights out of him by saying Salvatore Guaragna, because we were talking about Harry Warren, and I said to the sisters, I know his real name, Salvatore Guaragna. And they said they knew. And I said, now, how do you know the name Salvatore Guaragna? And they said years ago when they lived in Brooklyn, their brother would play poker with Salvatore Guaragna. Now, that was a number of years ago, and I haven't been back to that facility, but I'm sure the two sisters have passed away. But on one of my subsequent visits there, they had brought me a letter signed by Salvatore Guaragna, Harry Warren. All right. And I was just so impressed with this. They have it. What I was concerned about is as the two sisters died and somebody was going through their material, they saw this letter signed by Harry Warren, Salvatore Guaragna. It meant absolutely nothing to them. So I applaud Frank and what you folks are doing in preserving this stuff, because the younger generation has no idea at all about this. One of the things that I tried to do, I live close to Westchester University and became very familiar with people in the music department. And they have a substantial library. And I asked them, what do you have in the world of theater organ music? They had one LP made many, many years ago. So in my efforts and contacts in the theater organ world, I was able to get people to donate theater organ recordings. But the younger generation has no idea what a theater organ is, and probably never will. They hear the word organ and they think of a church organ or a synagogue organ or something like that.
Well, make no mistake about it. We're not going to be able, we collectively, all of us, are not going to be able to light a fire under young people or anybody else for that matter, and actually generate interest in radio, old time radio, history of top 40 radio, whatever you want to call it. But when the interest is generated, we're there to let them know where they can find it.
Right. That's it. But the important part is to let it be known that that opportunity exists, that site or sites exist. So if somebody wants to get it, they can. But the younger generation, by and large, is totally ignorant of this stuff. And I see Sally smiling because she's of the younger generation.
I feel like I kind of have to speak up at this point because I've been listening to everyone talking about the younger generation, whatever that may be, and whatever generation you feel I may be in. I will not reveal my age. However, when I was in undergrad, I specifically selected my undergrad school because of the program that they had, which was historic preservation. And I graduated with a dual degree in American Studies and Historic Preservation. And my goal my entire life has been to work in a museum. And I have been listening to old time radio since I was 10 years old, independently, on my own. I collected my own, I have my own boxes of tape recordings of Ed Walker and the Big Broadcast that I still listen to this day. Now, I have been called an old soul since I was very young, and I recognize that not everyone who's my age reflects this interest in the past. However, there are people of my generation that have interest in things that I have absolutely no knowledge of and no interest in. And I think that's the beauty of the world, right? Everyone having different interests and abilities. Now, mine has always been in history, radio. I went on to get my master's in archaeology. So we're talking lots of history, lots of museums, lots of ways of looking at the past and interpreting it, preserving it, and presenting it to the future. So it's very important to me. And there were lots of people of my generation in my programs continuing that. People who have continued to work in museums, continued to bring history and preservation to younger generations. In my classroom, now that I've completely shifted careers in my life, in my classroom, every year, I manage to find a way to bring radio into the classroom. It may not stick with the students that go through that year. They might just remember it as, oh, that Miss Stevens, she was pretty wacky. And I am. But I try. I introduce it to them. I do a lesson on radio. Sometimes we even put on our own plays. Sometimes we've written our own plays. Sometimes it's just a break that they can have. And maybe, just maybe, by introducing in a safe space, it'll inspire a child in the future to be like, you know what? I had a teacher who used to play this, or we got to do this on a break. And maybe they'll be inspired, and in the future, they'll want to preserve radio. You never know what's going to hit home with these children, and never underestimate what might strike someone's heart. You never know what may inspire a child, a teenager, an adult. But the separation of generations, and by saying the younger generation versus the older generation, will only further that divide and not bring people together, which is what we need to do with our preservation strategies. The whole point of our preservation is to preserve the past for the future. We
Now,
have no
Wayne-
past nor no future if we don't work together. And that's how I always feel about it. So I'll get off my little soapbox, but I'm just saying, we're here.
Can I make one comment? You know, these young folks, as you call them, and they are young folks, from my observations and going through clubs and so forth and seeing some of the young people that are there, they have to listen and one or two programs, and if they get excited about it, or if they can picture it in mind, because radio is theater of the mind. They're doing the same thing today, only they don't call it old time radio. They call it podcast. What do you hear on the radio now? You know, listen to our podcast. Clear Channel, that's every day. If you listen to an AM Clear Channel, they're promoting their podcast. And what that is nothing but theater of the mind, because they're picturing it and everybody's doing it a different way. So if there was some sort of connection there, that would draw a big interest in some of the detective shows or the CBS Mystery Theater, or maybe even Amos and Andy. God forbid it's some people, but you know, that's my comment.
Well, Wayne mentioned speaking to retirement homes, and I've spoken to a lot of groups in retirement homes as well as to university classes, and I use the same criterion to determine whether or not I'd actually succeeded at getting my message across by counting how many people were still awake at the end.
Frank, this is Walter Hughes. I'm wondering, do you have a time frame you're looking at? Because, you know, with my radio show, I've interviewed like 2,000 to 3,000 people from the 30s, 40s, and 50s have their careers, and that's sort of my bag. And I have a gigantic archive like that. Are you interested in something somewhat contemporary that digs into the history of radio, film, and TV?
Absolutely. Any radio air checks we're interested in.
Okay.
Community radio, you name it, whatever we're interested.
Okay.
By the way, I just wanted to add that I agree with Sally that it is very, very important to reach the younger generation. Yes, they may do similar with podcasts and things like that, but our focus is to try to get them exposed and interested into vintage old time radio, which is what we preserved all these years. Walden has a radio station, he gets it out. But there is a whole nother generation, believe it or not, under 70 that does have interest that the torch can be passed on to, which was my original thought. And a lot of them are coming in contact with it through the internet. That's the medium of communication for most of it. And that's why, to me, and I'm not saying that's your job to do, but I'm saying there's a lot out there that's available to them at this point, but they may be the ones that will preserve it just as much as the libraries will for the next generation. The other thing I wanted to add, if you wanted to make a list, I don't know if you thought of it, but Jay Hickerson has put together a log of what he believed to be existing. I don't know how up to date it is, how he's been working on it, but that may give you a foundation that you might be able to, work with him where he gets information to update his log and you get information as to what's out there and who has it.
Question for Frank. Do you work at all with the organization called Broadcast Pioneers?
We have not done any work with them. I have touched base with different groups of broadcast pioneers, especially the one comes to mind is in New York, but I also am aware of a very active chapter in California. We have worked with those groups. We've worked with state broadcast associations. The Missouri Broadcasters has just started their own archive of radio history and is very heavy into old-time live hillbilly shows from Springfield, Missouri. But I definitely will get in touch with the broadcast pioneers, and I know Mike up at the library at the University of Maryland too, and I've worked with him on things.
Yeah, I was a member of the broadcast pioneers for many years here in Washington, and of course now it's headquarters in New York City. But Sally, am very appreciative of your remarks tonight. I really appreciate it, and we are very fortunate in this area that our local WAMU, one of its most popular programs, it's a Sunday night from 7 to 11 o'clock, the old time radio programs. And it's probably has more listeners on Sunday evening than all of the other radio stations in the Washington area combined. And it's a very significant contribution to old time radio. And it's picking up new listeners every month.
I agree, John. And I will just say that as I said, I grew up listening to that by myself. I used to do word puzzles and listen to the radio for 4 hours, and it was joyous, and I still do it. But now I can also do it on my own schedule because it is played online and repeated, which is nice because that's exactly what is needed to bring it to a wider audience, not only just in our region, but across the country, across the globe, right? Across ages. And it actually inspired me that when I went to college to study historic preservation, I actually joined the radio station. And I specifically asked for the Sunday night slot because that was Ed Walker's slot and I wanted it and nobody else wanted it. So it was perfect. I got the same Sunday night slot and I pushed hard enough. I tried to get my own old time radio program. They wouldn't allow me because they were also equally afraid of copyright. Even though our tower was broken and we had about a half a mile range. Only my roommate listened, bless her. But I did manage to get my own, we had an old, at that time, and I apologize, it's what they called it, the oldies station. So I got to play all of the classic rock because before I was 15, I also never listened to anything that played before 1979. So I was just a very different child, but that has inspired me and I expose my students to different music, different interests, and you never know, like I said, what's going to reach out to them and what might bring them. And one day they might be the ones sitting here being like, boy, let me tell you, I had this teacher, Miss Stevens, she was so intense about radio. You never know.
Well, you sow seeds with children and you have no idea what's going to take root. And one of my big philosophies in life has always been to take the grassroots approach. So, when I can corral my grandsons, especially if I find an old time radio show that dovetails with interests that they have, I'll sort of come here, I'm gonna, let's listen to this. And they're like, oh, Granny. But, it's, if we don't share our past, it will be guaranteed that it'll die with us. And if we take steps to just keep letting people know in the younger generation, as Sally has so accurately pointed out, whatever that is, I think it works. I also have a cousin. I have twin cousins who are, I guess by now they're about 18, but 10 years ago, their parents were saying, on Sunday night, we can't go out and do anything because the kids insist on staying home and listening to the big broadcast. And if for those of you who listened to the Begathon 2 weeks ago on the big broadcast on WAMU, they were celebrating a lot of younger people from across the country who were giving money. So this is, that doesn't mean that everybody's kin and will preserve, but this is why the work that Frank is doing and all the collectors and presenters, they're contributing to keeping this absolutely amazing source of entertainment and culture alive. I mean, I was talking to my husband about this just, a few days ago, about how you listen to the radio ads during the war years, during World War II, and it's like, buy savings bonds and do savings bonds and help the cause. And it wasn't the Congress running up massive amounts of money of debt. It was, hey, we're all in this together and we can help this by throwing some dollars into it. And, that seemed to be a pretty successful endeavor. And we've moved a long ways away. So if we can keep this moving, people keep listening to this, maybe that'll help them get some good old ideas and bring them back.
Well, I was going to suggest to WAMU that they include some of the children's programs. There were a number of them: Captain Midnight, Little Orphan Annie, and a number of the other children's programs that were on the air, both serials. And I think that it might, if they put those on a little earlier in the evening, that it might induce some of the children to listen to those programs also.
I don't know, John, my favorite has been Suspense and The Inner Sanctum since I was 10. So, I couldn't wait till those late night ones, and I would turn off all the lights and totally give myself nightmares.
Well, I still eat my Ralston, my Tom Mix Ralston here.
And I've always loved the juvenile shows, and I also grew up on TV cartoon shows, which I still am a sucker for today. I mean, it's just, and then I spent 22 years in children's theater. So, it kind of all goes together. Great stuff. Frank, you've clearly sparked some passionate discussion, which I think was probably one of the goals, and you've done it brilliantly.
We know, as a group, we know that there are going to be folks who are simply not interested in what we're doing. But we're trying to address problems that they have with this to give them as much anonymity or as much flexibility as they need. So, folks, at this point, it's all in your hands. You decide what to do. And if you feel like you would like to dip your toes in the water, you can start easily and ease your way in. But the key to it all is sitting on a warehouse full of antique radios that nobody knows is there. And you can be as open about it, or you can be as closed-mouthed about it as you wish. But don't just let them go to waste, because we need to know that stuff is being preserved.
Absolutely.
I think we're all in agreement that the stuff needs to be preserved somehow. And I think we're wise in considering all possible ways, including what our friend offering here, because any preservation is better than no preservation.
And I would add, there is no one size fits all. So there are going to be, this is one, as George mentioned, one prong, and there are going to be other prongs that are probably only limited by one's imagination.
Imagination is so important. I remember as a child, I would listen to a radio program, but I would listen to it only from the underside of the living room chair because it scared the daylights out of me. It was called Lights Out. Anyone remember that?
Whoa.
And I felt very secure being underneath the living room chair.
I would listen under the dining room table, but it wasn't to spooky stuff, it was to music. So
I want to thank you guys for giving me a chance to talk tonight, because it's outreach. It's really all it boils down to. We are excited about doing something that has not been done, that needs to be done.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Frank. It's just been an outstanding evening. and a lively conversation. So thank you all for engaging in that. And now we will engage with Sally Stevens again, who has the answers to our quiz. So Sally, take it away.
Right. So the answers to our quiz, I will give you about 15 more seconds to enter if anyone is in the middle of entering on the screen. I don't have any way of knowing that, but I'm just going to let it run for about 15 more seconds, 10 seconds now. So if you wanted to enter it in, please do it now. Please get out your answer sheets. You don't need to use a red pen. It can be a purple pen or a blue pen or a green pen, just a different color than what you answered in. Okay, we want to be honest. All right, I'm going to end the poll and then I will launch it so you can see or share the results. I mean, not launch it. So you can see it. Please give me thumbs up that you can see the answers. Okay, I'm seeing thumbs. Thank you very much. All right, so number 1. On his mutual show, Tom Mix was a U.S. Marshal. His constant companion, Mike Shaw, was also in law enforcement as what? No one selected the San Antonio police sergeant on our online poll, but we were fairly evenly split with Border Patrol agent, local sheriff, and Texas Ranger. Jack, you pretty much fooled everybody right off the bat. The correct answer is C, local sheriff. Nice job, the 5 of you that selected online. Very good. Mike Shaw, local sheriff. Number 2, on the Shadow long-term series, who represented the law enforcement authority? Someone with a directional name, which was the first one to sort of tickle my brain. No one thought it was Lieutenant Southwest. Sorry, Lieutenant. Was it Commissioner Easton, Captain Northeast, or Commissioner Weston? Looks like on the poll, the overwhelming majority is saying Commissioner Weston, and the majority has it. D, Commissioner Weston is our correct answer. Hey. Number 3, Perry Mason, a quasi soap opera on radio, usually included which police officer? You know what? You're just trying to make me decode things that are tricky right off the bat. After a long school week, trying to decode these tricky words, I've decided his name is just Captain Bluch, though it's Bly, I'm sure, but it's Captain Bluch forever to me. Thank you to the one person that selected him. Could it be B, Lieutenant Tragg? C, Sergeant Bilko, my personal choice. I love that movie. And Jack, you got me. Or could it be Chief Roma? Dennis, are you hiding a secret career from us? He's moving off screen, everyone. You know now. We know now. The answer goes to the majority, B, Lieutenant Tragg. Not Sergeant Bilko, even though I picked that just out of necessity. How am I going to pass that out? Apparently nobody.
Sally, there's a TV show of Sergeant Bilko that you must see. That's the original show with Phil Silvers. If you like the movie, you will go crazy for the TV show.
I will go crazy for the TV show. Yes, I'm on board. Okay, somebody tell me where I can watch it or stream it or download it or buy all the DVDs, because I'm still that person. I'm there.
Yeah, you'll find it actually under the title "You'll Never Get Rich" was the original title of it before it became the Phil Silvers Show.
You'll never.
Or You'll Never Get Rich, I think.
That's what I say. That was first, and then it became the Phil Silvers Show.
guys. Number 4. Craig McDonald portrayed 2 different characters on Bobby Benson, and he was also the lead in which crime show? Crime Does Not Pay received the most votes. Highway Patrol received a vote. Official Detective received a few, and Call the Police also received one. You had them all over the board here, Jack. The answer is C, Official Detective. I can read numbers. So good job to the 3 of you that selected Official Detective. I think that one was kind of sneaky because it almost doesn't sound like an official program. It sounds a little too official to me. I make my own fun. Number 5. This is the mark question. All you marks, to your marks. Tough crowd. Okay, the 20 Mule Team Borax sponsored Death Valley Sheriff for years. Name the leading character role. Was it Mark Chase? 7 of you said yes. Could it be Mark Anderson? See here, also hiding a secret identity. Mark Trail, tired of hanging out with raccoons and squirrels, now decided to go be the sheriff. Or mark my words, a fine fellow. A fine fellow, that Mark my words. Oh, Jack. Oh, Jack. The correct answer is, majority has it, A, Mark Chase. Mark Chase. Side note, 20 Mule Team Borax is still an excellent product because it is wonderful in making slime. Just letting you know, it makes really good slime with some Elmer's glue and a little bit of hot water. And then you add all the glitter and the dye, and it's not a fun day. Don't do that. Don't do it. Number 6. Phillips H. Lord produced Policewoman, partially based on the career of NYPD officer Mary Sullivan, who played Mary on the series. This one was fairly tricky. A few people said Jan, Leslie, and Betty, but the majority says Joan Alexander. The correct answer is... Ooh, this was tricky, Jack. I see that tricky face. The correct answer is D. Nice job to the one person who selected D, Betty Gard. She played Mary. D is the correct answer. Number 7, the FBI in Peace and War was on CBS for 14 years. Who were the 2 leading agents? Oh my goodness. A tongue twister was this. Was it Lewis and Martin, Hardy and Laurel, Shepard and Andrews, or Allen and Burns? All spelled wrong. The majority said Shepard and Andrews. Are they correct? Yes, the majority has it. C, Shepard and Andrews is correct. Couldn't fool us, Jack, even with your tricky spelling. Number 8, Boston Blackie aired for 6 years on NBC, and he often consulted with which law officer? Commissioner Earlyday? Nobody picked that one. Inspector Faraday? Does he hang out in a cage often? C, Police Chief Maladay? Maybe he's having a bad day. Or Detective What-a-Day? Always having a good day. Well, everybody look in the cage, because the correct answer is B, Inspector Faraday. Inspector Faraday. No? Faraday cage? No? Okay. It's really hard when you're all on mute. It's like I'm back teaching virtually again.
I'm not sure you
Number
had the capacity.
9. Number 9, an early crime show, Calling All Cars, ran from 1933 to 1939. 39. Name the leading character. Captain Millard Fillmore, Chicago Police, perhaps his alternate career before being president, after being president, who knows? Another time. Could it be Lieutenant Frank Morgan? Frank, what are you telling us? No, not Frank. Dr. John H. Watson? Hanging out with Sherlock, perhaps? Or Sergeant Jesse Rosenquist of the Los Angeles PD? Looks like the majority selected D, and they would be correct. D, Sergeant Jesse Rosenquist, Los Angeles PD. And the final question. Number 10. The incomparable Charlie Chan was in the employ of San Francisco Police Department, Honolulu Police Department. That's what almost half. It was almost split 50-50. One said maybe California State Police. Nobody picked New York City Police. The correct answer is imaginary drum roll, please. Dun, 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 dun. Good job to the 7 of you. Honolulu Police Department, the Honolulu Police Department. Too bad that was a radio show, because that would have been a lot more fun to have been able to film on location in Hawaii, I bet. So there you are. Jack, you were trying to get me, and you got me. You got me this time. This was a very fun quiz. I very much enjoyed giving it. I'm sure it drove everyone else crazy because I kept cracking up, but it was very well done. And I'm going to stop sharing the poll now. I'm going to close it off. There you go. All right, well done.
That's a wonderful opportunity to put B. Benaderet in the quiz for Sally. We know how she loves that name.
It was just
Well,
BB.
I'm
Just
sure
BB.
that next month she may resurface.
No, Frank, you wouldn't do that to me, would you?
So our teacher has homework of her
I thought
own.
we were friends. We were friends, Frank. I thought we were friends.
A wonderful quiz, Jack. Really, I actually did better than I've ever done on any of our quizzes. And I think it's because of some of the outrageous choices that I just knew weren't right. But it was wonderful to watch Sally try to keep it all together while she read the thing. Perhaps in future she will read the quiz before the actual meeting. So
But then where's the fun in that?
exactly. So it's much more fun to watch Sally
it's
struggle.
a cold reading, 100%. I print it off and I don't look at it.
It's brilliant. It's brilliant. So thank you very much, Sally. That is just delightful. And at this point, we can move on to the business portion of the meeting, and I will stop the recording.